In the first reading from Paul to the Romans, Paul's using very vivid and graphic language, talking about being slaves to sin or slaves to righteousness. Like, I think in a modern context, we find slavery as like a buzzword with political implications. But in the time of Paul, in the time of Israel at this time, slavery was super common. You were always a servant or a slave to someone else. Ultimately, that in Rome, you'd be technically slaves to Caesar, because you had to give him complete fealty. But Paul is saying that in the spiritual life, we are slaves. And we're slaves to only two things. We're slaves to sin or we're slaves to God. There is no third option. When we give ourselves to sin, that's the lower master. And it's also the one that corrupts, that breaks down, that causes us to basically to continue to trying to search for that meaning, that fulfillment. It's really at the surface of man for man rather than man for God. And so many of the spiritual masters, Louis de Montfort talks about being slaves to Jesus, and many of the spiritual writers talk about being slaves because we have to radically submit ourselves in obedience to the Lord in order to grow in that freedom. It's actually when we submit ourselves in that obedience, in that slavery, especially to Jesus and his church, that we actually receive the freedom and the joy that comes from that. It's like the ultimate Christian paradox. It's actually when we're actually submit ourselves, when we cause ourselves to be obedient, we're actually more free than we could ever be if we were free to do whatever we wanted. And that brings us to today's feast day, probably certainly one of the more popular saints of our day, in John Paul II. And he chose as his motto, totus tuus, which is totally yours. And certainly it's through the lens of the Blessed Virgin Mary. But he, even in his opening address, one of the things that he said, be not afraid. Open your doors to Christ. Open it and submit yourselves to his love, to obey him. And the joy that you are seeking, you will find. And so today, as we continue into this Mass, let us ask for John Paul II's intercession, that we too may open our doors to Christ as totally his, so that we may continue to do the mission that has been entrusted to us, so that we may be seen as the faithful steward that is ready for the Master's coming.